The moment your own family stops saving you a seat at the table, you realize you were never really invited at all. I should have understood something was wrong the second Emily opened the front door wearing that bright smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Happy birthday, Margaret," she said, leaning in for a quick hug that smelled faintly like vanilla candles and expensive perfume. Behind her, the house glowed with warm yellow lights, and for one foolish moment, I let myself believe this night was going to mean something. The sound of laughter drifted from the dining room. My grandchildren were running through the hallway in socks, sliding across the hardwood floors while Jason pretended to scold them. It looked like one of those holiday commercials families like mine used to watch together years ago, back when I still believed love inside a family stayed permanent. "Mom, you made it," Jason said as he came over to kiss my cheek. "Traffic okay?" "Only took about 40 minutes, I replied, smoothing the wrinkles from my navy blue blouse. I had spent nearly an hour getting ready that evening. At 68 years old, birthdays start feeling less like celebrations, and more like quiet reminders of how many people slowly stop noticing you. But this year had felt different. Emily herself had called me 3 weeks earlier insisting they wanted to do something special. "You deserve a real celebration," she had said sweetly over the phone. "You've done so much for all of us." I remember sitting alone in my kitchen after that call with tears in my eyes because I truly believed she meant it. Maybe that sounds pathetic. Maybe women my age become too grateful for crumbs. But after losing my husband 11 years ago, I had learned how lonely evenings could feel. Especially when your own children become busy building lives that no longer seem to include you. I carried the apple pie carefully into the kitchen, while Emily rushed around pretending to manage last-minute details. "You didn't have to bring dessert," she said. "But Jason loves your pie." "He always did," I answered softly. The kitchen counters were crowded with food. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, fresh rolls wrapped in cloth napkins. Everything smelled wonderful. Emily had even decorated the dining room with silver balloons and white roses. My chest warmed seeing it all. Maybe this really was for me. Maybe I had been too sensitive these past few years. "Grandma," my youngest granddaughter Sophie shouted as she wrapped her little arms around my waist. "Daddy said we're having cake later." "We sure are," I laughed. Emily glanced over quickly. "Sophie, honey, don't touch Grandma's blouse with sticky hands." The little girl immediately pulled away. I pretended not to notice. Small things like that had become normal with Emily. Tiny corrections. Tiny embarrassments. Tiny reminders that I somehow never fit properly inside her version of the family. Still, I ignored it. I ignored all of it because tonight mattered to me more than I wanted to admit. Around 6:30, everyone began gathering near the dining room. Jason's brother Mark had arrived with his wife. Emily's sister poured wine into glasses while music played softly through hidden speakers. The entire house buzzed with conversation and warmth. I stood near the hallway smiling quietly to myself, thinking maybe loneliness had finally loosened its grip on my life. Then I walked into the dining room. And stopped. The large oak table was fully set with polished silverware, folded linen napkins, and little handwritten name cards placed carefully beside every plate. Jason. Emily. Mark. Carol. Sophie. Ethan. Even Emily's sister had a seat. I stared at the table once. Then twice. My smile slowly faded. There was no place card with my name on it. I looked around instinctively, confused at first, certain another chair would appear somehow. Maybe Emily had forgotten. Maybe they were still setting up. But every seat was already filled. Every plate already placed. Then Emily appeared beside me carrying a stack of paper napkins. "Oh," she said casually, like she had almost forgotten I existed. "Margaret, we're a little tight on space tonight." Before I could answer, she gave me a quick smile and pointed toward the kitchen behind us. "We set up a spot for you in there." It'll probably be quieter. 2. For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. The laughter around the table continued. Glasses clinked. Someone started talking about vacation plans. And I just stood there staring at my own family while my heart slowly dropped somewhere deep inside my chest. Then I saw it. A single folding chair beside the kitchen counter. A paper plate already waiting for me next to the sink. For a few seconds I could not move. I just stared at that folding chair beside the kitchen sink like it belonged to somebody else. The paper plate sitting there looked almost unreal under the bright overhead light. White plastic fork. White plastic cup. While everyone else in the dining room had real plates, wine glasses, cloth napkins, and candles. I heard Jason clear his throat behind me. Mom, it is only because we ran out of room, he said quietly. I turned toward him slowly, waiting for him to smile awkwardly and say they would fix it. Waiting for my son to pull out a chair beside him and tell me of course I belonged with the family. But he did not. He just stood there with one hand shoved into his pocket while Emily adjusted the serving bowls on the table like nothing unusual was happening. You understand, right? She asked sweetly. We thought the kitchen might actually be more comfortable for you. More comfortable. I almost laughed at that. There was barely enough room beside the counter for my knees. The folding chair looked like something dragged out from a garage sale. Of course, I heard myself say, even though my throat suddenly felt tight. It is fine. That is the strange thing about humiliation at my age. You do not scream. You do not cause scenes. You simply shrink. You pretend your heart is not breaking because somewhere deep down, you know nobody in the room is going to stop it anyway. Emily smiled brightly the second I agreed. Perfect, she said. Dinner is getting cold. Everyone sat down around the dining table while I carried my own plate into the kitchen. The sound of chairs scraping against the hardwood floor followed me like an echo. I sat carefully on the folding chair, smoothing my blouse beneath me while laughter drifted in from the next room. From where I sat, I could see part of the dining room through the doorway. I could see candlelight flickering across smiling faces. Jason pouring wine. Emily laughing at something Mark said. My grandchildren reaching for rolls. Nobody looked toward the kitchen. Not once. I picked up my fork and tried to swallow a bite of mashed potatoes, but my stomach felt twisted into knots. I kept telling myself not to cry. Not here. Not on my birthday. Sophie suddenly appeared in the doorway holding her juice box. Grandma, why are you sitting in here? She asked innocently. Before I could answer, Emily's voice floated sharply across the dining room. Sophie, sweetheart, come back to the table. The little girl hesitated. But Grandma is all alone. Emily forced a small laugh that made my skin crawl. Grandma wanted some quiet time, honey. Wanted. I looked down at my plate because I could not bear the expression on Sophie's face. Children always notice cruelty faster than adults do. Sophie slowly returned to the dining room, and the conversation picked back up almost immediately. Like nothing had happened. Like I had disappeared. I sat there listening to forks clink against dishes while memories kept flashing through my mind whether I wanted them to or not. The years I babysat every weekend so Jason and Emily could build their careers. The $40,000 I quietly gave them for the down payment on this very house after Jason lost his job years ago. The holidays I spent cooking for 14 people while Emily took credit for hosting. I never asked for recognition. I never needed applause. I only wanted to feel included. Loved. Respected. But sitting there beside the sink while my family celebrated 20 feet away, I finally understood something painful. They had grown so used to my sacrifices that they no longer saw me as a person. I was useful. Convenient. Temporary. And maybe worst of all, completely replaceable. Halfway through dinner, I heard Emily speaking softly to her sister Rachel. Honestly, she whispered, though not quietly enough, Margaret gets emotional about everything. This is why I tried to keep tonight simple. Rachel laughed under her breath. Well, she is from a different generation. Emily sighed dramatically. Exactly. She always finds a way to make herself the center of attention. My fingers tightened around the plastic fork so hard I thought it might snap. The room suddenly felt smaller. Hotter. I stared at the untouched birthday cake sitting on the kitchen counter beside me while tears burned behind my eyes. Then, through the dining room doorway, I noticed something that made my chest sink even lower. On the wall beside the table hung a framed family photo taken last Christmas. Jason. Emily. The children. Mark and Carol. Everyone smiling together in matching sweaters. Everyone except me. I was not in the picture at all. I left 20 minutes later carrying half of the untouched apple pie back to my car. Emily had insisted I take it home because there was already too much dessert in the house. Jason walked me to the driveway, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets while cold October air moved through the trees above us. Thanks for coming, Mom, he said awkwardly. Thanks for coming. Not sorry. Not are you okay? Just thanks for coming, like I had attended some office event instead of my own birthday dinner. I stared at him underneath the porch light, searching for the little boy who used to cry whenever I left him at kindergarten. The little boy who once made me a birthday card from construction paper and proudly wrote, "My mom is my best friend." But standing in front of me now was a tired middle-aged man avoiding eye contact because facing the truth would require courage he no longer had. Did you know? I asked quietly. Jason frowned slightly. Know what? That there would not be a seat for me. His jaw tightened almost immediately. That was all the answer I needed. Mom, please do not make this bigger than it was. Bigger than it was. I felt something inside me go strangely calm. Good night, Jason. I climbed into my Buick before he could say anything else. The drive home took 43 minutes. I know because I stared at the clock on the dashboard nearly the entire way. Traffic lights blurred through my windshield while old memories kept surfacing whether I wanted them to or not. Suddenly I remembered Thanksgiving 2 years earlier when Emily changed dinner from my house to hers 3 days before the holiday because she claimed it would be easier for the children. I remembered showing up with 3 casseroles only to discover she had already cooked everything herself. My food sat untouched on the counter all evening, while Emily accepted compliments for hosting such a beautiful dinner. Then there was Mother's Day last spring. Jason had promised brunch reservations. I bought a new lavender sweater for the occasion. An hour before we were supposed to meet, Emily texted saying Sophie had soccer practice rescheduled and they would need to cancel. Later that afternoon, I opened Facebook and saw pictures of all of them having brunch downtown with Emily's mother. Matching smiles. Mimosas on the table. The caption read, "Perfect Family Sunday." I remember staring at that photo for nearly 10 minutes before quietly putting my phone face down beside me on the couch. At the time, I told myself it was just a misunderstanding. Tonight finally forced me to admit the truth. It was never one moment. It was a pattern. Tiny exclusions stacked together so slowly I kept convincing myself they were accidental. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my chest felt heavy with exhaustion. My little white colonial house sat silent beneath the porch light exactly the way it had every evening since my husband died. Usually the quiet comforted me. Tonight it felt unbearable. I carried the pie inside and placed it on the kitchen counter without turning on the television or the radio. The silence wrapped around me immediately. I kicked off my shoes and slowly walked toward the hallway when my phone buzzed inside my purse. For one foolish second, my heart lifted. Maybe Jason finally felt guilty. Maybe he wanted to apologize. But it was only an automatic birthday email from my pharmacy offering 20% off vitamins. I laughed softly at the absurdity of it before the laughter suddenly turned into tears. Real tears this time. The kind that leave you breathless. I sat down at my kitchen table and cried harder than I had cried in years because humiliation does not hurt only in the moment it happens. It hurts because it confirms every fear you secretly hoped was untrue. Around midnight, after washing my face, I opened Facebook again for reasons I still cannot explain. Maybe pain makes people search for more pain. Emily had already uploaded pictures from dinner. There they all were gathered around the beautifully decorated dining table smiling beneath the silver balloons. Jason had his arm around Emily. The children grinned beside the birthday cake. The caption read, "Family birthday dinner for Margaret. So grateful for special nights together." I stared at the screen in disbelief. There was not a single photograph showing where I had actually been sitting. Then I noticed something else. In every photo Emily had posted that year, I appeared less and less. Christmas, Easter, Sophie's dance recital, family barbecue in July. Sometimes I was cropped at the edge. Sometimes missing entirely. It was like watching myself slowly erased from my own family one picture at a time. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a headache that settled behind my temples like pressure before a storm. Sunlight pushed through the kitchen curtains while the coffee maker hissed softly beside me, but nothing inside the house felt normal anymore. It was strange how one evening could suddenly rearrange your entire understanding of your own life. I kept thinking about that empty spot at the dining table. About the folding chair beside the sink. About Jason standing there doing absolutely nothing. For years, I had made excuses for little things because mothers are trained to protect their children even when they become adults. We soften reality for them. We convince ourselves they are busy, stressed, distracted. But sitting alone at my kitchen table that morning, I finally admitted something painful to myself. Jason had seen exactly what Emily was doing. And he had allowed it. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text message from Emily. "Thank you again for coming last night. Hope you enjoyed yourself." I stared at the message in disbelief. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just cold politeness wrapped in fake kindness. A second message followed almost immediately. "By the way, if you have extra photos from dinner, send them to me for the family album." Family album. I nearly laughed out loud. I set the phone face down on the counter without replying. Then I opened my refrigerator and noticed several plastic containers stacked neatly on the shelf. Lasagna for Jason because he loved my recipe. Homemade soup for Sophie when she had a cold last week. Banana bread I baked for Emily because she once casually mentioned craving it. My entire life had slowly become organized around making things easier for other people. And somehow, after all of it, I still ended up eating alone beside a kitchen sink. That afternoon, I drove to the grocery store mostly because I could not stand sitting inside the house replaying memories anymore. The weather had turned cooler overnight, and dry leaves skittered across the parking lot while people rushed around carrying pumpkins and cinnamon candles for fall decorating. Normal life continued everywhere around me while something inside me quietly cracked open. I was reaching for a carton of milk when I heard someone call my name. "Margaret?" I turned to see Linda Harper from my church smiling warmly beside her shopping cart. "Happy birthday yesterday," she said. Emily posted those lovely family pictures online. Everyone looked beautiful. The words hit me harder than she realized. I forced a small smile anyway. "Thank you." Linda tilted her head slightly. "I was surprised you were not in more of the photos though. Usually you are right in the center with those grandbabies attached to you." For a second I could not speak. Even strangers were noticing. "Oh, you know how teenagers are with cameras these days," I lied quietly. Linda gave me a sympathetic look that suggested she did not believe me for 1 second. Older women recognize sadness in each other almost instinctively. Before leaving, she squeezed my arm gently and said, "Do not let people make you feel invisible, Margaret." Invisible. The word followed me all the way home. That evening, while folding laundry in my bedroom, I accidentally knocked over an old storage box from the top closet shelf. Photographs scattered across the carpet. Pictures from years ago before everything became complicated. Jason at 8 years old holding a fishing pole beside his father. Family road trips to Colorado. Christmas mornings in matching pajamas. Birthday dinners around my old oak dining table where everyone squeezed together laughing so hard somebody always spilled sweet tea. Back then, I was not an obligation. I was the center holding everyone together. Then one particular photograph caught my attention. It was from the year Jason and Emily bought their house. We were all standing in the front yard smiling proudly while Jason held the new keys. I remembered exactly how terrified they had been financially. Jason had lost his management position 6 months earlier, and the bank nearly denied their mortgage application. Without thinking twice, I had emptied almost half my retirement savings to help with the down payment. $40,000. I never asked to be repaid because that is what mothers do. We help. We sacrifice. We trust love will remember us later. My chest tightened as another memory surfaced suddenly. About 6 months ago, I had overheard Emily talking on the phone in the backyard during one of Sophie's birthday parties. At the time, I barely paid attention. But now the words came back clearly enough to make my stomach drop. "Once the house is eventually ours," Emily had laughed softly, "things will be so much easier financially." At the time, I assumed she meant Jason's house. But standing there in my bedroom holding that old photograph, a terrible thought slowly settled into place. Emily had not been looking at me like family for a very long time. She had been looking at me like an obstacle standing between her and something she wanted. For the first few days after my birthday, I waited for somebody to call. Not because I wanted another apology that would never come, but because some small part of me still believed my family would realize what they had done. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened for half a second before disappointment settled in again. Most of the messages were grocery coupons, church reminders, or weather alerts. Jason never called. Emily never mentioned the dinner again. It was as if they had all silently agreed the evening had been perfectly normal. By Friday morning, something inside me changed. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Quietly. Like a door closing somewhere deep in the house after years of being left open. That morning, Jason texted me at 7:23. "Hey Mom, any chance you could pick up Sophie from school today? Emily has a work thing." I stared at the message while my coffee cooled in my hands. Normally, I would have answered immediately. Normally, I would have rearranged my entire day without hesitation. Instead, I typed 4 simple words. "I am not available today." 3 dots appeared instantly. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. "Everything okay?" he finally asked. I looked out the kitchen window at the maple tree in my backyard, leaves turning gold beneath the pale autumn sunlight. "Yes," I replied. "Everything is fine." It was the first time in years I had ever said no to him. The silence afterward felt almost shocking. That same afternoon, I drove downtown and booked myself a weekend trip to Vermont with a senior travel group from church. 3 days in the mountains. Fall foliage tours. Wine tasting. Cozy inns. 6 months ago, I would have laughed at the idea. My entire schedule used to revolve around my family's needs. School pickups. Babysitting. Birthday shopping. Emergency grocery runs. Last-minute favors. Somehow, I had become both indispensable and invisible at the same time. But now, sitting inside that little travel office while a cheerful woman named Denise handed me brochures covered in red and orange maple trees, I realized I could still build a life that belonged to me. That evening, Emily called for the first time since my birthday. "Hi Margaret," she said in that polished voice she used whenever she wanted something. "Jason mentioned you could not get Sophie today." "That is right." A pause followed. "Well, we just wanted to make sure everything was okay. You have seemed a little distant." "Distant?" I almost smiled. "I think I am simply tired, Emily." "Tired?" "Yes. I have spent a lot of years helping everyone else. I may need some time for myself." The line went quiet for a second longer than normal. I could practically hear her recalculating things in her head. "Of course," she said carefully. "You should do whatever makes you happy." But there was tension beneath her sweetness now. The first crack in the control she thought she had over me. Over the next 2 weeks, I slowly disappeared from the routines that had once consumed my life. I stopped dropping off homemade meals every Sunday. I stopped offering to babysit whenever Emily complained about being overwhelmed. I stopped mailing birthday checks to distant relatives just because Emily said it would look thoughtful. And most importantly, I stopped calling first. The silence that followed was revealing. Jason only contacted me when he needed something. Emily only reached out when childcare fell through. Even the grandchildren's visits suddenly became less frequent once convenience disappeared from the equation. One afternoon, I ran into my neighbor Carol while trimming roses in my front yard. She leaned against the fence watching me for a moment before smiling. "You look different lately," she said. "Do I?" "You look lighter somehow." I thought about that after she walked away. Maybe she was right. For years, I carried my family like heavy luggage I was too afraid to put down. Obligation. Guilt. Constant emotional labor. But once I stopped overextending myself, I noticed something surprising. My house felt peaceful again. I started reading novels in the evening, instead of waiting anxiously for texts asking for favors. I joined a Wednesday watercolor class at the community center. I bought myself fresh flowers every Friday just because I liked how they brightened the kitchen. Slowly, my world stopped revolving around whether other people appreciated me. Then, late one Sunday night, my phone rang unexpectedly. "Jason." I almost let it go to voicemail. "Hello." I answered quietly. My son sounded exhausted. "Mom, have you talked to Emily recently?" I sat up straighter in bed immediately. "No." "Why?" There was a long pause on the other end. Then Jason sighed heavily. "We have been fighting a lot lately." For the first time in years, I did not rush to fix it. Jason sounded older on the phone that night. Not physically older, but emotionally worn down in a way I had never heard before. I sat quietly against the headboard in my bedroom, while rain tapped softly against the windows outside. "What kind of fighting?" I asked carefully. He let out a long breath. "Everything. Money. The kids. Work. Stupid stuff." I listened without interrupting. For years, I would have immediately stepped into problem-solving mode. I would have offered advice, reassurance, free babysitting, homemade meals, anything to ease the tension in his life. But now I stayed silent long enough for him to keep talking on his own. "Emily says I never help enough around the house," he admitted. "But I am working overtime almost every week now." "I see." Another pause followed. "Things were easier before." I almost asked what exactly he meant by before, but deep down I already knew. Before I stopped carrying half their responsibilities for them. Before they lost the convenience of having a mother they could rely on endlessly without considering her feelings. "Well," I said gently, "sometimes people only notice what someone was doing after it stops happening." The line went quiet. Jason understood exactly what I meant. The next few weeks revealed more than years of pretending ever had. Emily began calling more often, but never simply to talk. One afternoon she asked if I could watch the children overnight because she and Jason desperately needed a break. I politely declined because I already had plans with my watercolor group. Another time she asked if I could lend them $5,000 temporarily because an unexpected roof repair had come up. In the past, I would have transferred the money before she even finished explaining. This time I simply said, I am focusing on my own finances right now. Her voice changed immediately. Not openly rude. Just colder. Less polished. Of course, she replied tightly. I just thought family helps family. The irony almost took my breath away. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen for several minutes staring at the phone in my hand. Family helps family. Yet somehow that principle only seemed to apply when they needed something from me. Meanwhile, my own birthday humiliation had never even been acknowledged. Not once. A few days later, Sophie called unexpectedly from Jason's phone while they were driving home from school. Grandma, are you mad at us? She asked in a tiny voice. My chest tightened instantly. Oh sweetheart, of course not. Then why do we never see you anymore? Children always ask the questions adults avoid. I swallowed carefully before answering. Sometimes grown-ups just need a little time to themselves. Sophie hesitated. Mommy says you have been acting sensitive lately. The words hit me harder than I expected. Sensitive. That was how Emily framed everything. Not hurtful behavior. Not exclusion. Just me being overly emotional. Well, I said softly, sometimes people's feelings matter even if others do not understand them. Sophie became quiet for a second before whispering, I did not like you sitting alone in the kitchen. My eyes closed immediately. Even now, weeks later, hearing it spoken aloud reopened the humiliation all over again. Before I could respond, Emily's voice suddenly appeared in the background. Sophie, honey, give me the phone. A moment later Emily came on sounding overly cheerful. Sorry about that. You know how kids are. I said nothing. Anyway, she continued quickly, we are having a little family dinner Friday night, if you want to come by. I almost laughed at the timing. Another dinner invitation only after childcare, money, and favors had disappeared. I cannot, I answered calmly. I leave for Vermont Friday morning. Silence. Vermont, she repeated. With who? Friends from church. Oh. She sounded genuinely confused, as if the idea of me having a life outside their family had never fully occurred to her before. Well, maybe another time then. That Friday, I boarded a small tour bus with 11 other women between 60 and 75 years old. We spent the weekend driving through mountain roads lined with blazing orange trees, drinking hot cider at little roadside farms, and laughing over card games in the evenings. For the first time in years, I felt like a person instead of a resource. Nobody expected anything from me except my company. On the second night, while sitting beside a fire pit outside the inn, my phone buzzed again. Jason. I considered ignoring it but answered anyway. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded tense. Emily and I got into another fight tonight. I stared out at the dark mountains while sparks floated into the cold air above us. About what? You. Something inside me went still. What about me? Jason hesitated long enough to make my stomach tighten. Then he said quietly, I asked her why there was not a seat for you at your own birthday dinner. And she told me maybe if you stopped acting like a victim all the time, people would actually enjoy being around you. For a moment I could not speak. The fire pit crackled softly nearby while laughter from the other women drifted through the cold Vermont air, but everything around me suddenly felt far away. I tightened my sweater around my shoulders and stared into the darkness beyond the mountains. Did she really say that? I asked quietly. Jason let out a tired breath. Yes. Something painful moved through my chest then, but strangely, it was not shock anymore. It was confirmation. Deep down, I had already known how Emily viewed me. Hearing the words out loud simply removed the last excuse I had left for her. "And what did you say?" I asked. Silence. Long enough to answer the question without words. "Jason," I said softly, "you do realize your silence is part of the problem." He inhaled sharply on the other end of the line. "I know." It was the first honest thing he had said in weeks. "I should have said something that night," he admitted quietly. I thought if I ignored it, things would calm down." I closed my eyes. That had always been Jason's weakness. Avoidance. Even as a little boy, he hated conflict so much he would rather let unfair things happen than risk upsetting someone. Unfortunately, men like that often marry women who learn exactly how to use it. "Mom," he continued, his voice lower now, "I do not think Emily likes having you around unless she needs help." The words stung even though I already knew they were true. "What made you finally realize that?" Another pause. "Because the second you stopped doing things for us, she started talking about you differently." My grip tightened around the phone. "Differently how?" Jason hesitated again. "Like you were selfish. Difficult. Manipulative. She keeps saying you are punishing us. Punishing them." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Apparently, setting boundaries after years of humiliation now counted as cruelty. "Jason," I said carefully, "when was the last time Emily called me simply to ask how I was doing?" He did not answer. "When was the last time either of you invited me somewhere without needing childcare, money, or help?" Still silence. Somewhere nearby, one of the women from my travel group called my name asking if I wanted hot chocolate. I waved gently to let her know I would be there in a minute. Then I focused back on my son. "I spent years convincing myself little things did not matter," I told him quietly. The cancelled holidays. The missing photos. The jokes. The way Emily speaks to me when nobody else notices. But your birthday dinner finally made me see the truth. "Mom, no," I interrupted gently. "You need to hear this. I have spent so much time trying to stay connected to this family that I accepted treatment no one should accept." Jason's breathing became uneven on the other end. "I never wanted you to feel unwanted. Intentions do not erase actions." The line fell silent again. This time, I let it stay silent. For years, I had rushed to comfort everyone before they could fully sit with consequences. But people only change when discomfort finally reaches them. "There is something else," Jason finally admitted. His voice sounded strained now. "Last week, Emily and Rachel were talking in the kitchen when they thought I was upstairs." My stomach tightened immediately. "Talking about what?" "You." He swallowed hard. "Rachel asked if Emily felt bad about your birthday." And Emily laughed. I felt cold all over despite the fire beside me. "What did she say?" Jason exhaled shakily. "She said you have always been dramatic, and honestly, if you stopped acting like the victim all the time, people might enjoy being around you more." The same sentence. Word for word. Hearing it again somehow hurt even more. "Then Rachel asked if Emily thought things had gone too far," Jason continued quietly. "And Emily said he stopped." "Jason." "She said eventually everything would work itself out anyway because you would probably leave the house to me someday." I froze completely. The fire popped softly in the distance, while my heartbeat thudded slowly inside my chest. "And then Emily said once that happened, she wanted to renovate your kitchen completely because it looked old and depressing." My eyes closed instantly. Suddenly every memory connected together like pieces sliding into place. The fake smiles. The forced politeness. The subtle exclusion. Emily had already mentally turned my house into hers long before I was even gone. "Mom?" Jason's voice sounded panicked now. "Are you there?" I opened my eyes slowly toward the dark mountains stretching beneath the stars. And for the first time since my birthday, I felt something stronger than sadness rising quietly inside me. Clarity. Yes, I answered calmly. I am here. Then I stood up beside the fire pit, looked toward the warm lights glowing from the inn behind me, and realized something important. I was done begging people to value me. When I returned home from Vermont 3 days later, the first thing I noticed was how peaceful my house felt. No tension. No guilt. No waiting for somebody else's approval. I unlocked the front door, carried my suitcase inside, and stood quietly in the hallway listening to the silence around me. For years I had mistaken loneliness for emptiness, but now I was beginning to understand they were not the same thing. Loneliness hurts when you are begging people to stay connected to you. Peace arrives when you finally stop begging. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a cup of coffee while sunlight poured across the hardwood floor. For the first time in a very long time, I started thinking seriously about my future instead of everybody else's. My retirement savings. My home. My time. My happiness. All the things I had quietly placed behind my family's needs for decades. Around noon, I called a local estate attorney named Daniel Mercer, whose number Linda from church had once given me after her husband passed away. I would like to review my will, I told the receptionist calmly. There was nothing dramatic about the decision. In fact, it felt strangely practical. Necessary, even. Because suddenly I understood something important. People value what they believe they can lose. And for years, my family had believed I would always remain exactly where they left me. Available. Forgiving. Predictable. That evening, my phone buzzed with another message from Jason. Can we come by Sunday? The kids miss you. I stared at the text for a long moment before replying. Sunday dinner at my house. 6 o'clock. Formal attire. 3 dots appeared immediately. Formal, he wrote back. Yes, I answered simply. It is important to me. He did not ask further questions. Over the next 2 days, I prepared carefully. Not out of anxiety. Out of intention. I polished my grandmother's silverware for the first time in years. I ironed linen napkins. I placed white roses in crystal vases down the center of the dining table. I even pulled my late husband's old jazz records from storage and let soft piano music fill the house while I cooked. Pot roast. Garlic mashed potatoes. Homemade rolls. Apple cobbler. The kind of dinner I used to make every Sunday when my family still felt whole. But this time, something was different. I was no longer preparing the evening to earn love. I was preparing it to reclaim dignity. Around 5:30 Sunday evening, I changed into a dark emerald dress and pearl earrings Richard had given me on our 30th anniversary. When I looked in the mirror, I hardly recognized the woman staring back. Not because I looked younger. Because I looked certain. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Sophie and Ethan rushed inside first, hugging me tightly while Jason followed carrying a bottle of wine. Emily entered last wearing a cream-colored dress, and the same polished smile she always used when performing kindness in public. Margaret, your house looks beautiful, she said while glancing around carefully. Thank you, I answered pleasantly. Jason looked slightly nervous all evening. Emily looked confused. She kept studying me as though trying to figure out what had changed. The truth was simple. I had stopped needing their validation. And people become deeply uncomfortable when the person they once controlled no longer asks permission to exist. We chatted politely in the living room, while jazz music played softly nearby. Sophie showed me drawings from school. Ethan talked about baseball tryouts. For a little while, everything almost felt normal again. Then dinner was ready. Everybody, I announced calmly, the table is set. They followed me toward the dining room laughing softly among themselves. The table glowed beneath candlelight exactly the way mine used to when Jason was young. White china plates. Crystal glasses. Carefully folded napkins. Emily smiled immediately. Oh my goodness, she laughed lightly, this looks straight out of a magazine. Then her smile faded. Slowly. Because she noticed something. There were only enough formal place settings for everyone except one person. Emily looked around the table once, confused at first. Then twice. Margaret, she said carefully, I think one chair is missing. No, I replied softly. It is not. Silence filled the room instantly. Jason's face lost color almost immediately because suddenly he understood exactly what was happening. Emily gave a nervous laugh. I do not understand. I picked up a plain white paper plate from the kitchen counter beside me along with a plastic fork and napkin. Then I gestured calmly toward the small folding chair waiting near the laundry room doorway. We are a little short on space tonight, Emily. Nobody moved. Even the children went silent. Emily stared at the folding chair as realization slowly spread across her face. Wait, she whispered. Are you serious? I looked directly into her eyes for the first time in months. Funny how a kitchen can feel so lonely, isn't it? The silence inside the dining room felt almost physical. Emily stood frozen beside the table staring at the folding chair near the laundry room, while her face slowly lost all color. Jason looked like someone had knocked the air out of him. Even the children sensed something serious had just happened because neither of them moved or spoke. For several long seconds, nobody said anything at all. Then Emily let out a nervous laugh that sounded painfully forced. Okay, she said lightly, I think you have made your point. I held her gaze calmly. Have I? Her expression tightened immediately. Margaret, this is ridiculous. Ridiculous. The exact word Jason used the night I sat alone beside the kitchen sink. Funny how cruelty suddenly feels unacceptable once it touches the person delivering it. Grandma, Sophie whispered softly, why is Aunt Emily sitting over there? I looked down at my granddaughter gently. Because sometimes people only understand pain after they experience it themselves. Emily's jaw tightened. So this is revenge? No, I answered quietly. This is perspective. Jason finally stepped forward then, rubbing one hand across his forehead. Mom, he said carefully, maybe we should all just sit down and talk. I almost smiled at the irony. Now he wanted a conversation. Now that discomfort had entered the room for someone other than me. Talk about what? I asked calmly. The night you watched your wife place me beside the sink on my own birthday and said nothing. His eyes dropped immediately. I know I handled it badly. No, I corrected softly. You handled it exactly the way you always do. By avoiding conflict until someone weaker absorbs the humiliation for you. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Jason looked genuinely ashamed for the first time in weeks. Emily crossed her arms defensively. I already told him I never meant to hurt you. I turned toward her slowly. You did not accidentally forget a chair, Emily. You intentionally placed me away from the family table. Then you mocked me afterward for being hurt. Her face flushed bright red. That is not what happened. Really? I asked quietly. Would you like me to repeat what you told Rachel? The room fell silent again. Jason looked sharply toward his wife. Emily immediately understood. You were listening to my private conversations, she snapped at him. No, Jason answered tiredly. I just finally started paying attention. Something shifted in the room then. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just truth finally becoming impossible to ignore. Emily looked around the dining room almost desperately, like she expected someone to rescue her from the discomfort she had created herself. But nobody did. Not even Jason. I walked calmly toward the head of the table and rested my hands lightly against the back of my chair. For years, I said softly, I convinced myself if I loved all of you enough, eventually I would feel loved the same way in return. So I ignored little insults, little exclusions, little humiliations. My eyes moved toward Jason. I ignored canceled holidays. Then toward Emily. I ignored being erased from family photos. Finally, I looked at the folding chair beside the laundry room doorway. And I ignored the moment my own family decided I belonged beside dirty dishes instead of beside them. Nobody interrupted me. But the truth is, I continued quietly, people treat you the way you allow them to treat you. And I finally stopped allowing it. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly. So what now? You embarrass me and suddenly everything is even. No, I answered honestly. Nothing about this is even. Because unlike you, I never wanted anyone to feel worthless. I only wanted you to understand what you did. For the first time all evening, Emily looked uncertain instead of angry. Jason slowly pulled out a chair beside him and looked toward me. Mom, he said quietly, please sit with us. I studied him for a long moment. The little boy I once knew was gone, but maybe something honest still remained underneath the years of weakness and avoidance. Slowly, I nodded. Then I looked toward Emily. You may sit at the table too. She blinked in surprise. What? You heard me. Her expression shifted cautiously while she moved toward the empty chair beside Jason. Nobody spoke as everyone settled into place again. The jazz music continued softly in the background while candlelight flickered across the table. But something fundamental had changed. The pretending was over. Halfway through dinner, Sophie reached for my hand beneath the table and smiled. I am glad you are sitting with us tonight, Grandma. I squeezed her fingers gently. So am I, sweetheart. Across the table, Emily stared quietly down at her plate while Jason looked at me with an expression I had not seen in years. Regret. Real regret. And strangely enough, that was all I needed. Not revenge. Not apologies. Just the certainty that I would never again shrink myself to fit inside someone else's limited idea of my worth. Because a woman who finally remembers her value becomes impossible to humiliate twice.